Welcome everybody to one more Talks at Google event. Today's guest needs no introduction virtually. Today's guest is Yanis Varoufakis, the former finance minister of Greece during one of the most tumultuous periods of its financial history, if not history overall. He's a professor of economic theory at the University of Athens and a former member of the parliament. He is author of The Global Minotaur, among other books, and his newest book is And the Weak Must Suffer What They Must. I would like to ask Mr. Varoufakis to come to the podium here and share with us thoughts. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a very rare occasion for a politician, academic, confused person like me to be in a place like this. I've done it before in similar organizations, even though Google is unique for reasons you do not need me to explain. And I have excellent memories of trying to bring together a techie audience with my concerns about the ways of the world. In other words, politics. I'm going to talk to you today and try to encourage you to participate, to start a dialogue with me on the concept of money. The purpose is not academic, it's not to have a philosophical discussion about money. It's my view that we live in a very troubled world. That Europe, and that's what this is about, is, if you want, the part of the global economy where the troubles of global capitalism manifest themselves in the most poignant and magnified manner. Europe is perfectly capable of destabilizing the United States. It already has destabilized China, and through China it has destabilized Latin America. And if my analysis holds water, the next generation is going to face challenges that have not been faced since the 1930s. I hope I'm completely wrong, but I very much fear that I'm not. And money is a very good starting point of a conversation, especially with an audience like your good selves. The reason is that money is the most quantifiable variable of an economy. Love, beauty, value, they're all supremely important, but their qualities, any attempt that we make to quantify them devalues them, in a sense. But money comes in as a result of commodification and marketization to turn values into quantities, to quantify that which is considered by the market to be valuable. Now, the reason why I'm beginning with money to tell a story about the troubles of global capitalism and the challenges of the next generation is because if you think of money as a good, what is a good? Something people want. Yeah? So tomatoes are good, potatoes are good if people want to eat them, and money is good if people want money. If it is a good, then in a commodified capitalist world, it must also be a commodity. And of course it is a commodity. Yeah. You just look at the foreign exchange market. Huge trades every day, money being exchanged for money. So money is a good, and it is a commodity. So why is its price negative in more than 40% of the world? The price of money is the rate of interest. It's a price one is prepared to accept for not using money, for giving to somebody else. And we live in a world, especially in Europe, where the price of money is either zero, or extremely very low, or indeed, in places like Japan, in Europe, and in certain bond markets here in the United States, it is negative. Now, how can a good have a negative price? It must be a bad, by definition. Negative prices are associated with bads. So you have toxic waste in your backyard, you are prepared to pay someone to get rid of it. That's what negative price means. So how can it be that money could have a negative price? Well, the reason is that money is not just a quantity. It is not just a commodity. It is a lot more than that. A 19th century revolutionary referred to it as the alienated ability of humankind. That was Karl Marx, by the way. But forget Marx, since we are in California, and not in Vermont, which I believe is the People's Republic of this era, or New Hampshire, or something like that. Now, let's think of the reason why the price of money in Europe today is negative, and why it is almost zero if you look at the Fed's overnight rates. If you are an entrepreneur and you are tossing and turning in bed at night, mulling over and wondering as to whether you should invest in a new production line, a new company, a new product, a new line of products, what is it that you were worried about at that moment? You are worried about whether that investment will turn a proper return out. And what will this depend on? It will depend on two things. It will depend on your costs, and it will depend on the demand for the commodity that your production line will be churning out 6 months, 8 months, a year from the moment you make the investment, if you choose to make the investment. So the price of money, the rate of interest, is an input into the costs. So the higher the price of money, the more costly money it is to borrow or to utilize for the purposes of your investment. So you think, okay, so this is where it works like a commodity. When its price comes down, you think, okay, my costs are coming down, so my propensity to invest increases. But that is not what keeps entrepreneurs awake at night and potential investors. What really keeps them awake at night is the prospect of sufficient demand for the commodity 6 months, 1 year later. And what does this depend on? That depends on whether others like herself or himself, who are also turning and tossing in bed at night, will make the decision to invest. Because the aggregate level of demand is driven by the aggregate level of investment. So this is a problem that suddenly moves out of the standard conception of money as a commodity that has a price, like potatoes that have a price. Because with potatoes, if you have excess supply of potatoes, you are selling potatoes, and you want to get rid of them before the end of the day because you don't want to sell the same stale potatoes tomorrow. What do you do to get rid of them? You reduce the price, and at some point you will hit a level of price that will clear the market, your stalls. People will just buy it. If you drop it at 20 cents a ton, people will just... So there is a price which clears the market. But the investment game that I just described is precisely that. It is a game. And what is a game? It is a situation where the outcome does not depend only on what you do, but it depends on what others do and what you think that they think that you think that they will do. That's what a game is. Like in chess, like in the stock exchange. So suddenly, whether you invest or not depends on your belief or optimism that the level of aggregate investment will exceed a certain threshold. Because only if it exceeds a certain threshold, only then will there be enough demand to make your investment profitable. So the way when I was still a professor, the way I tried to explain this to students, especially MBA students who are cutthroat and try to undermine each other like there's no tomorrow. Okay, I remember I used to love doing that. It was great fun for me, not for them. I used to say to them, you know what? I hate marking scripts. So I'm going to give you your grade now. Day 1, first lecture. I'm going to give you the semester grade now, and then we can meet for the purposes of your education and mine. Yeah? Just take a piece of paper out, write your student number, and I want you to add a number, a digit between 1 and 9, including 1 and 9. And your grade will be as follows. I will pick up this piece of paper. I will find the piece of paper with the lowest integer, choice. That will be a common factor for all of you. I will multiply this by 11. And for each one of you, I will subtract from that 11 times the minimum your own choice. And that will be your grade. Which means that if everybody chose 9, the minimum would be 9. 9 times 11 would be the common factor for everyone. Minus 9, their own choice, 90% everyone. If everybody chose 8, 80% everyone. If everybody chose 1, 10% everyone. Okay? Now I can tell you, every single time I did this, the vast majority chose 1. And everybody failed. Okay? And you think, and this is not a prisoner's dilemma. It's not a free rider problem. It's not a situation where you want to cheat. You want others to choose a high number and for you to choose a low number. Why? Because if you choose the low number, then the minimum goes low, and you lose too. Okay? So here is a typical coordination problem. Everybody is trying to do the following. The optimal strategy, by the way, in this game is to choose what you think the minimum will be amongst the rest, and choose that. So if you think that everybody else will choose 9, you're best off choosing 9. Because if you choose 8, the minimum becomes 8, and you lose too. If you choose the minimum will be 8, you choose 8. If you choose, so it's a guessing game. Everybody is trying to guess the minimum. And what they in the end do depends on the average degree of optimism. If the class is optimistic that people will be optimistic, that everybody else will be optimistic, then they all choose 9, confirming the optimism that they imagined would be prevalent. But if they're pessimistic, they will all only take. I remember I would pick out one of those students and I would say to them, "Okay, you chose 1. Why did you choose 1? Don't you realize by choosing 1 you fail and everybody fails?" And the answer is yes. But you know what? It is a rational belief, prediction, to think that there will be at least one person in this room who fears that there is another person in this room who fears that there is someone in this room who will choose 1. Because then 1 will be the minimum choice, and then I'm best off, given that 1 will be the best choice, to choose 1, because if I choose more, then you will be subtracting more than 1 from the common factor. Okay? Now that is the conundrum of investment. If investors fear that the level of investment will be low, then the level of investment will be low. And their pessimistic expectations are going to be confirmed. And they will turn around and say, "See, I was right." But that doesn't mean they were right. It means that we live in a world of multiple equilibria. Some good, 9, 8, 7, in the example that I gave you, some awful, 1, 2, 3. And courtesy of being equilibria, there's no one outcome which is more equilibrium than the other. They're all equilibria. Some are better, some are worse. What determines whether we go from the good to the bad or vice versa? Average optimism. This is a problem with recessions that turn into permanent depressions. This is a problem when investment is completely stuck. Have you noticed that in the United States today, we have the following very interesting phenomenon and very worrying phenomenon? We have extremely low rates of interest, extremely high profit rates, and very low levels of investment. How is this possible? The rate of interest should be in equilibrium, more or less the same as the rate of profit. The rate of profit should reflect the rate of interest and vice versa. If the two are out of kilter, it means we have a major incongruity. Something is broken in our economy. And if profit rates are high, why don't people invest to make more profit? And yet they don't. The example I gave you with the failure of optimism, I think offers an answer. At the moment, we have a situation where if you take the United States, Europe, and Britain, the British, some of them like to be thought of as outside of Europe. Okay, so effectively Europe and the United States. We have, the last time I looked, around $6 trillion doing nothing. Slashing around in the financial sector, not being invested. Refusing to be invested. Why? It's not that those who own that money do not want to invest it. And by the way, by investment, I mean real investment. I don't mean, buying houses and buying shares. That's not investment. Investment is when your company says, okay, we're going to expand this particular sector, we're going to invest in people, we're going to invest in machinery, we're going to invest in new technology. That's investment. So one thinks of capitalism as a system where you have savings, you have financial intermediaries that take those savings and lend them to companies that then invest it. Those investments produce the incomes that then replenish the savings. And this recycling process continues. But at the moment, savings in the developed world, let's put it this way, exceeds investment by 7 trillion. Never before in the history of capitalism have we had such high levels of savings and such low levels of investment. If you think of the rate of interest as the price of money that must equilibrate savings and investment, when there is excess supply of money, when savings is there and investment is there, what happens is the price of money must drop so that this happens. Except the price of money drops to below zero, and this gap is not ameliorated, doesn't go away. And why doesn't it go away? Let's go back to the bedroom of the entrepreneur who is tossing and turning at night. And let's say that this is a very old-fashioned entrepreneur like me. I'm not an entrepreneur, but I'm old-fashioned, because I listen to the radio at night when I can't sleep, to the BBC World Service, since I was a kid, for some reason. And at 3 in the morning, tossing and turning, wondering, shall I invest, shall I not invest? And suddenly, the news comes through. Janet Yellen is reversing the tapering. Instead of increasing interest rates, as she has announced that she would do, she's going to reduce it even further. Because of China, because of sluggish growth, blah, 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 blah. Things you read in the Wall Street Journal and the Financial Times on a daily basis. What do you think at that point? Oh, good, the price of money is going further into negative territory, I will invest. Or do you think, what I think you will think, oh my goodness, for Janet to be doing this, things must be really bad. And then the drop in the price of money makes you do what? Stop investing. So it does exactly the opposite of what happens in the market for potatoes. In the market for potatoes, the price comes down and the excess supply disappears. In the money market, when we're caught in a crisis like this, the price of money comes down and the problem gets worse. And the excess supply of money gets worse. And this is why we are caught up in this never-ending crisis. After 2008, the United States has stabilized itself through the activities of the Fed. But this incongruity between savings and investment has not gone away. This is why you have stagnant wages. And this is why after a whole generation in the United States, after the mid-70s, so for the first time in the history of the United States, the end of the escalator between federation, between independence of the United States and 1974, wages constantly increased. Every generation knew that the next generation would be better off. From 1973 onwards, median wages have been declining, and they have not stopped declining ever since. Consumerism was boosted in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s because of debt. Increases in wages that stopped were replaced by increases in indebtedness. In 2008, our comeuppance came. The nemesis followed for the hubris, foreclosures. Since then, stagnant wages, skyrocketing inequality. And the result is Donald Trump. Yeah? In America. In Europe, we have even worse phenomena. We have the Nazis in the Greek parliament. We have the Alternative für Deutschland in Germany. We have the Popular Front in France. We have UKIP in Britain. The list is endless. But these are just, in my view, symptoms of this conundrum that we're facing. Yeah? Now, many people, especially here in the United States, tend to think that, the problem is the Fed. The problem is too much easy money. The problem is that we have lost control of the money supply, that we ended the gold standard. Instead of having a real commodity that is controlled, whose supply is controlled by nature, we allowed the Fed to be creating easy money before the crisis, easy money after the crisis, and there is a loss of credibility of the money markets. This is all nonsense. allow me to say. The reason is very simple. There can be no such thing as a gold standard. There can be no such thing as apolitical money. And I've already explained, I think, why. The story about optimism. Because the moment pessimism prevails, and it can prevail for any reason, for any reason. There can be some earthquake, there can be a bubble bursting in some subprime market or in some particular money market. There are all sorts of different candidates to spearhead a degree of pessimism in a boisterous, dynamic capitalist economy. But the moment the seeds of pessimism begin to grow and turn into an ugly plant, at that moment, the only thing you can do is not reduce interest rates, is not go through a deflationary spasm by reducing prices, price of money, price of labor, cheapening things that you want to increase the supply of. The only thing you can do at that point is to intervene politically through a political mechanism of effectively expanding the money supply on the one hand and expanding public investment on the other hand. This is a New Deal idea. It's a very simple idea. It didn't work perfectly in the 1930s, but I can assure you, I would like to convince you, if I had another lecture to talk about that it prevented the slide of the United States into fascism. If it wasn't for the New Deal, the grapes of wrath, Steinbeck, would have led to the emergence of extremely nasty political forces in this country. It's even debatable whether the United States would side with the Allies against Nazism in Europe. So the idea that our criticism, very justifiable criticism of the authorities, of the establishment, and remember, I'm a left-winger, so I'm the last person to defend the established way of doing things. But the idea that somehow we will find a technical fix, whether you call this Bitcoin or some technological evolution of money that will replace the fiat money that the Fed, the European Central Bank, and so on print, this is simple fantasy. And let me just make the simple point that if you imagine that you take the Bitcoin story, which is a digital version of the gold standard. You tie the quantity of money to some apolitical process. In the case of gold, to how much gold you can find under the surface of the earth. In the case of Bitcoin, to some algorithm invented by somebody with a Japanese pseudonym. Huh? If you do that, then you ensure two things. Firstly, that economic development is going to be slower than it would be otherwise long term, simply because at some point development will exceed, or growth, the rate of growth will exceed the rate of growth of the money supply. When that happens, this is immediately going to have a deflationary effect. So there will be less money chasing after more goods. So the prices are going to have a natural tendency to fall. And the moment you introduce deflationary expectations in the mindset of consumers, investors, producers, and so on and so forth, suddenly you have a diminution in investment. Why? Because if you know that something that today costs 10, tomorrow will cost 9, you will have a natural tendency to delay consumption. And therefore, if investors think that you will have a natural tendency to reduce consumption, they will have a natural tendency to reduce investment. So that starts a downward deflationary spiral, even if it isn't very acute. So that's one reason. The second reason is when there is a crisis, and crisis will always happen, they are to capitalism that which hell is to Christianity, unpleasant but essential. The system doesn't work otherwise. You're going to end up with a crisis and no capacity to boost money supply in order to create liquidity by which to fight the insolvencies that are the result of the crisis. Of course, what we have been doing, the quantitative easing of the central banks, which began in Japan in the 1990s, then was transferred here in the United States with Ben Bernanke responding aggressively by increasing the money supply for the purposes of what I suggested. And now Europe always comes 4 years too late. doing it in Europe now. The problem with this is that, yes, it is a palliative for the crashing economy, the global crashing economy, but it's only a palliative. It's like giving aspirin to somebody who's suffering from a far worse disease. It helps, but doesn't cure it. And the central bankers know that. So there's been a failure of the politicians to get together and to support the central banks with the only thing that can be the silver bullet that kills the pessimism, the New Deal idea. So the point I'm trying to raise here in the heart of the tech industry here in Google is that money seems like a quantity. People like you think, okay, quantity, technical solutions, mathematics. Anything that is quantified must be a mathematical problem which we can solve without the messiness of politics. But my message to you is that money is not just a quantity. It's also a quality that has to do with human sentiment, the optimism that I was referring to, which cannot be quantified. You remember the game that I was playing with my students, or I was forcing upon my students, doesn't have a solution. It has multiple solutions. And when you don't have, everything is possible, when every outcome is a potential solution to the mathematical model, then effectively it is as if you don't know. Imagine a meteorological model which reports that tomorrow there is an equal probability of rain, hail, or shine. It may be mathematically accurate, but it is useless for the purposes of prediction. So the technology and the mathematics cannot substitute for the political process which is necessary in order to stabilize a debt deflationary global economy or national economy or economic bloc like that of the European Union. Of course, I'm a great advocate of technological solutions as long as we do not replace politics with technology, as long as we fuse the politics, progressive politics, with good technologies. And let me just give you one example of something that I was planning to do in the Ministry of Finance in Greece. Maybe get some feedback from you. In Europe, the reason why Europe is such a basket case, think about it. 2008 happened, unemployment rose both in Europe and in America to 12%. You're down to 5.5%. In Europe, we're at 12%. We still have deflation. Investment is the lowest it's ever been. Why is this? Well, if you look at the Eurozone, the collection of countries, of 19 countries using the same currency, but without having even a confederacy, let alone a federation, we created an astonishing economic system. We have a large central bank, like the Fed, but no state next to it or behind it, no treasury. And we have lots and lots, 19 governments without central banks. So you can imagine why, when the force, the full blast of the 2008 financial disaster hit both America and Europe, America had the automatic stabilizers, not clever politicians. Politicians could all be asleep. They could have all been on holiday. The beauty of the federal system is that it's an automatic stabilizer. It goes into operation without anyone knowing it. So, for instance, when Nevada went under, the banks of Nevada were salvaged immediately by the FDIC, not by the state government of Nevada going to Paris and to Berlin and to Washington, cap in hand, begging for funds to save its banks. Similarly, when the level of unemployment increased in Nevada because construction workers were unemployed following the collapse of the real estate market, it was Social Security that immediately from the federal budget supplemented that. So the state of Nevada did not die. If it was operating as Europe does, it would have been a Greece. Insolvent, with insolvent banks, constantly cap in hand, seeking more extent and pretending Ponzi loans. So in Europe, we have this situation. And okay, given that we had this situation, we needed, and I think every Eurozone member state, except perhaps Germany, needs more degrees of freedom, more fiscal space. So here is an idea that I had on how to create more fiscal space. even though we don't have a central bank. And we were locked out of money markets because our state was bankrupt. So this is how we did it. This was an idea I had, and then we reached the implementation to the level where we were almost ready, 3 or 4 days away from pressing the button and actually starting the system up. The tax office, the IRS, our IRS, has, of course, a website where you go in there, you have your tax file number, your social security number, you go in there, you see how much money you owe, and you do a transfer using web banking from your bank account to the state, yeah? Like everywhere. The idea was to create a reserve account per tax file number. And when the state owes a lot of money to a lot of people because it's bankrupt, including its own citizens. So companies that sell drugs, pharmaceuticals, or general suppliers of the state, it takes 18 months before they get paid because of the lack of liquidity of the Greek state. So I was thinking, okay, imagine that we can say to the entrepreneurs, we owe you $1 million from drugs you sold to a hospital. You can wait for 18 months, or I can put this money in your reserve account now. Just type it. It's just the zeros and ones that go into this reserve account. And I give you a PIN number. Of course, you can't take this money out because I don't have a central bank and I don't have the right to monetize anything. But I can give you a PIN number, and you may owe money to another of your suppliers. And using that PIN number, you can transfer it to that tax file number, and then the third party can use this money to repay its taxes to me. Or you can give it to your workers. Or it can be an alternative. It's euro-denominated, or dollar-denominated if this happened here. It's euro-denominated, so it's not another currency. But it uses, it's tax-backed liquidity that is created through the tax system. And the idea here was to take it further. Even in good times when the state doesn't have a liquidity problem, to use the same system, but differently. To say to people, you do not, the state doesn't owe you any money, but if you want us to put some money in that reserve account, we will do it. Give me $1,000 or euros and I'll do it. Now, why would you want to give me 1,000 euros? You wouldn't. Why entrust the state with 1,000 euros when you don't owe the state anything and the state doesn't owe anything to you? Well, you will have to pay tax next year, won't you? You have a car, you have a house, you have sales tax that you may have to pay, income tax, all sorts of different taxes and charges. Well, what if I were to say to you that this because this is digital stuff, it can be time-stamped. And the system knows that if you've kept this money, you've purchased it for me, you transfer real euros to the state, and I put these numbers in your reserve account, time-stamped. In a year's time, I'll give you 10% off for extinguishing taxes. 10% of an interest rate into this day and age is humongous. Yeah? And this is a way that the state, this is peer-to-peer lending for the state, between the citizens and the state, bypassing the bond markets. And then you could develop it further. You can have an app that allows you to go to the supermarket and use this to pay for things, given that the supermarket will be able to use this for its own suppliers and to repay its own taxes. So this is, if you want, a parallel payment system, which is purely digital and which gives more degrees of freedom to a fiscally stressed entity, whether this is a municipality, a country in the Eurozone, whatever. Or even a community that wants to develop its own payment system, parallel payment system, that is denominated in the same currency as the nation or the bloc. Now, I had, of course, an additional incentive for doing this. When a guy called Alexis Tsipras, who then became my prime minister, started talking to me years ago about, at that time, I had no intention, no interest, no inkling that I would ever get involved in politics. I was just talking to him because he wanted to try out some ideas. He asked me, I remember back in 2012, 2013, because at that time, the little political party that he led had 4%, and it was 3 years later that we went up from 4 to 40%. and one government on the 25th of January last year, 2015. He said to me, if we challenge the creditors and we say to them that the policies they're imposing upon us are killing the cow that is supposed to produce the milk that they want. So it's in their interest not to kill the cow, our country, our economy, our taxpayers, our private sector, and to reboot this agreement. What do you think the first challenge we will face is going to be? And I was very clear on this. I told him, I wrote him a memo back in 2012, 2013. I said, the first thing that will happen is they will close our banks down, or they will try to, in order to throttle us, in order to asphyxiate us, to force us to retreat. By the way, let me just now go to the future, or to the more recent past. I became the Minister of Finance on the 27th. We won the election on the 25th of January. I became Minister of Finance 27th. On the 30th, 3 long days afterwards, oh, by the way, another embedded story. The first day I moved in on the 27th, I convened a meeting of the Treasury officials to ask them the pressing question, what's our funding like? The answer was, Minister, we're not doing very badly. I said, okay, define not very badly. We have 11 days before we default. Now, that is a very inauspicious beginning to a ministerial career for a Minister of Finance. Okay? So that happened on the 27th. 2 days later, I had the president of the Eurogroup. The Eurogroup is the body of finance ministers of the Eurozone, as well as what we call the troika. Christine Lagarde, representing the International Monetary Fund, Mario Draghi, the president of the European Central Bank, our Fed, and the representatives of the European Commission. The president of this body, a gentleman called Jeroen Dijsselbloem, the finance minister of the Netherlands, came to see me in my office. And lo and behold, it was as if on cue. We had several meetings with minders and assistants and all that bureaucratic, boring stuff. And then the fun was when we met together in my office, just the two of us, tete-a-tete, to get to know each other. Now, instead of, nice to meet you, let's work together, I got the following. What do you intend to do with the program? That's almost science fiction, the program. Yeah? The program is all the economic policies that were being applied between 2010 and 2015, which led to the loss of one third of GDP, of nominal GDP in Greece. That's worse than the 1930s in the United States. So this program is the reason why we were elected, because the Greek people had enough of it. And we were elected to renegotiate it. And I tried to be as moderate as I could. And I said to him, look, we were elected to challenge this program. But, of course, this is a program that the rest of the European Union is committed to. So what happens in a democracy when you have two principles that clash, two programs that clash? You sit down and you find a compromise. So why don't we sit down and start with a clean sheet and ask ourselves a very simple question. How can we help the Greek economy recover in such a way as to allow the Greek people to regain hope and the creditors to get some of their money back? Because the way we're going, there will be no money for you guys, simply because the country will be dead. We will have created a desert and called it peace, Tacitus, Roman Empire. And the answer was, if you insist on renegotiating the program, your banks will be closed by the 28th of February. That was on the 30th of January. Right? So what I had said to Tsipras in 2012-13 happened on the third day. On the third day. In the end, they closed the banks down, and they overthrew a government. But this is not for you Googlers here. But I'm trying to explain. Remember the parallel payment system, the digital parallel payment system that I was planning? This was also a way of creating a system that would be functional and operative if they close the banks down, giving us a capacity to maintain a semblance of normality in the economy, a system of transactions that would survive. So the only reason I'm mentioning this is not only because it's, I think, topical, but because it speaks to what I was saying before, that I believe that technological solutions, digitization of money, is the way to go, but calling upon you not to fall prey to the fantasy of apolitical money, to the fantasy that technology can take the politics out of money. In this book, I mention a scene from the House of Commons, Britain's Parliament, where a woman that I spent my youth despising and demonstrating again and again and again against, Mrs. Margaret Thatcher, a very right-wing politician, nevertheless a politician who on the last day of her prime ministership, the day she was fired by her own cabinet, there was a coup d'etat within the cabinet orchestrated by ministers who wanted Britain to join the euro. And Thatcher was opposing them tooth and nail, and they overthrew her. So it became clear to her during the cabinet meeting of that day that she was out. People who were in the room, I have friends one friend who was in the room told me that it was the first time ever that she shed a tear. She was visibly, the Iron Lady cracked. But then she regained her poise and went to the House. She was still Prime Minister. And there was a scheduled Prime Minister's question time. But of course, the news had spread that this was her last one. And she let rip. She allowed herself to enjoy her last appearance in the House of Commons as a Prime Minister. And the question from the opposition, a very silly question from the opposition, who tried to undermine her and to split the Conservative Party between those who wanted to go into the euro and those who didn't like Thatcher, was what did she think about, why was she opposed to the idea of a central bank which is outside the political process, the European Central Bank, depoliticizes Europe's money and allows Europe to unite in a monetary union without money being in the hands of politicians. And this right-wing politician at that moment said something that really appealed to me, and still does. I think it was probably the most prescient and correct statement on money by any European politician of the last 30 years. That doesn't mean that I agree with everything else she did. I still am proud that I opposed her government, that I joined every demonstration I could find against her. She said, who controls interest rates, who controls monetary policy in Europe, controls the politics of Europe. That cannot be changed with technology. But a new form of progressive politics, together with a new technological, innovative approach to digitizing money and creating parallel systems for payment that give maximum degrees of freedom to regional governments, to municipalities, to communities, is, I think, the way to go. And allow me to finish up by saying that this idea has to have a global manifestation. In 1944, somewhere in New Hampshire, Bretton Woods, there was this conference of 150 delegates that designed the post-war global plan, as I call it, the Bretton Woods system, as it has come to be known, to which I devote a couple of chapters in the book. The idea there was to create a monetary system that is global, with a surplus recycling mechanism, very similar to the idea of the New Deal, but applied at the global level. A system which would find ways of taking the surpluses from the regions in which they are produced and recycling them as productive investments in the regions that are in deficit. This is what happens in the United States. When Boeing gets a contract to build a new fighter jet, the stipulation is that, yes, but we have to have a greenfield factory built in Arizona or in Missouri, in a state which is depressed, not out of philanthropy towards Missouri, but that is the only way of ensuring that California and Washington State will continue to have their surplus if incomes are being produced in Missouri through technologically advanced work that produces both skills and income, so that the income of Missouri can continue to purchase the net exports within the dollar zone of California and Washington State. Now, unless we find a way of returning to the spirit of Bretton Woods, hopefully using technologies for a digital accounting system, a digital payments mechanism that would penalize both surpluses and deficits and redistribute surpluses in order to ameliorate for the gross imbalances between savings and investment at a global scale, we are not going to be facing the challenges that the next generation is facing both here and in Europe. Thank you.
The growth of the economy overall seems to be based on population growth. Japan's GDP per capita is actually continuing to increase, and yet you don't see optimism in Japan. And it seems like the reason is that the size of the economy as a whole is not continuing to grow.
Japan is not in strife because of population decline. Population decline and aging is not helping. It is not helping. But that's not the reason. The reason why Japan fell into this trap in the 1990s was because there was a huge bubble in real estate. That bubble was burst after the Plaza Accords, when effectively the United States forced Japan to overvalue, to revalue an already overvalued yen. That created a massive wave of insolvencies, both in real estate and in banking. Then the government for years tried to cover up the insolvency of the banks by turning them effectively into zombies. And by the time we reached 2008, when the rest of the economy fell off a cliff, the rest of global economy fell off a cliff, a net exporting-oriented economy like Japan simply managed to stay still, to stagnate. Take Germany. Germany is also shrinking, and also in the same demographic trap that Japan. Its growth rate has been quite positive and quite optimistic. Now, of course, Germany itself is caught up in the trap of the Eurozone. But my view is that we should simply be looking at GDP per capita. And there is nothing to stop us from remaining perfectly optimistic as long as savings and investment are balanced. Take Japan, for instance. Remember, I was talking about the gap between savings and investment. It's huge in Japan. There is so much saving compared to investment that this gap, for me, this gap is the solvent of optimism. It feeds on optimism negatively by creating pessimism, and then the pessimism feeds back into maintaining the gap between savings and investment. What Japan needs is to open its borders to migrants.
So why wasn't this system that you developed for payments finally deployed, even after the referendum rejecting the terms of the European Union? And do you think Greece would be better off if it had been deployed?
Well, it was only one of the projects that I had in train. The 5 months I was in government were a period of conflict between us and the troika of lenders. It was a war that we lost. And we lost it because our side was divided. With Alexis Tsipras, we had an agreement that if they closed down our banks, we would retaliate. And we had leverage. We had 30 billion of a debt to the ECB, which if we restructured, and we were perfectly within our legal rights to do so because it was Greek law, not American law, not British law, then it would bring down the whole QE program of Draghi. Draghi knew that. He would not have shut down our banks if our threat to restructure the debt was credible. That threat stopped being credible when Alexis and I were disunited, and when parts of the government, the Deputy Prime Minister to be precise, signaled to Draghi that don't listen to Varoufakis, we won't let him haircut those bonds. So the moment the other side realized that I would not be allowed to use the leverage that I had, it was just a matter of waiting until our surrender. I hoped that the referendum would energize the Prime Minister to say, press the button. It didn't. That night he said to me, it's time to surrender. And I said, no, it's time for you to surrender and for me to resign. And of course, none of the other projects went through. Because from that moment onwards, we have a troika government. My colleagues, my good friends who remain in government are not in power. They simply rule on the basis of the email list that they receive from Brussels.
So we have a few online questions because we have an audience, like around the world. You have been a strong advocate of trying to fix the European Union experiment instead of letting it collapse under its poor design and decisions of the non-democratic Eurogroup. How many countries will have to be sacrificed in this process?
I hope none. You see, this question has embedded in it a false assumption. The false assumption is that I am advocating that we should sacrifice some countries to save the rest. I have an organic view of the European Union. The European Union either survives as a whole or it collapses as a whole. And if it collapses as a whole, if it disintegrates, we are going to have a repetition of the 1930s. There is going to be a rupture along the River Rhine and across the Alps between the northeast of Europe, that will become a new Deutschmark zone, that will be highly deflationary as the new Deutschmark goes through the roof. And the rest, the Latin areas plus Greece, they're going to go through a shock of high inflation and high unemployment as their currencies devalue. And no one is going to come through well out of that. Political monsters will emerge when this happens because the conflicts will be great. The depression is going to spread from Greece everywhere else. Bad things begin in Greece and spread throughout Europe. The Cold War began in Greece. The Euro crisis began in Greece. The disintegration of the European Union is beginning in Greece. I don't know why. We are, sort of fated to be the harbinger of terrible things to come. Okay? And therefore, to conclude my answer to this question, at the moment, we are sacrificing one nation after the other. We are pushing them off the cliff of competitive austerity in order to preserve something that is disintegrating and cannot be preserved. My suggestion is this. We have a choice. Either do away with the European Union or try to fix it for everyone. The doing away with it is going to throw us off that cliff that I was referring to, the other cliff, into the vortex of the 1930s. This is my estimation. I may be wrong. The alternative is to, and technically, it's very simple to stabilize the European Union economically in a way that no one gets sacrificed. The problem is the political will. This is the irreducibility of politics.
And one more question, which is, in hindsight, what was the best and what was the worst measure that you implemented as a minister?
Well, the thing is, you see, I didn't get the chance to implement almost anything. One of the reasons was that I had the lenders on the other side doing this and saying, if you dare put anything through Parliament, any bill, without our approval, this will be casus belli and the end of the negotiations. Do you believe that? So, the only two bills that I pushed through Parliament, one had to do with what we call emergency measures against extreme poverty. So effectively, we gave a credit card, prepaid credit card, to 350,000 families who were below the lowest of the low levels of extreme poverty. And with it, it's the equivalent of food stamps, plus provisions of minimum supplies of energy, because their houses were disconnected from the electricity grid, and some help with their rent. This was the one thing that I tried to do. And the second thing, which is, I think, much more significant, it didn't go through Parliament because we were waiting for the negotiation. It was a plan for ending the Greek crisis, which was compiled together with very able people from this country and elsewhere. So my team comprised people like Jeffrey Sachs from Columbia, Larry Summers. You've heard of Larry Summers, I think. A former conservative finance minister from England, Lord Lamont, the former chief economist of Deutsche Bank. we killed ourselves for 3-4 months to come up with a plan for Greece's recovery, ending the Greek crisis, that had a fiscal plan, a plan for debt restructuring that would alleviate the pressures of unsustainable debt, but in a way that would not be politically unfathomable for the creditors, and reforms for product markets, for the pension fund industry, and so on and so forth. This, I'm very proud of that document. The fact that that was not even discussed with the lenders, because the lenders were simply dragging us through the mud until we were overthrown. That is another matter. But I'm still confident that that document will go down in history as a missed opportunity.
Hey, I'm from Athens, and we have some other Greeks, so thanks for being here. Just wanted to ask about this payment system you mentioned. How would you encourage people to transact in the system if they lack faith in what backs the system, the Greek tax system and the Greek government?
Well, to begin with, in the first phase, they would have no choice, in the sense that, you are owed $1 million. I don't have the money to give it to you in cash. So I'm saying to you, here is $1 million, and you can use it to pay her. Huh? And if she owes money to me, if she owes money to the state, and she does, because I'm the state and she's a citizen, or an entrepreneur, and you can extinguish that debt, and she can extinguish her debt, tax debt to me, that's all the incentive you need in the world. It's a very efficient way of multilateral tax extinguishment, or extinction. Extinguishment, yes.
Thank you. So it sounds like the no vote from the referendum became a yes in large part, as you were talking about, was Cyprus feeling like, he could say forced to surrender. I mean, you could phrase that different. You might phrase that differently, but I'm wondering what is at this point is really the next realistic steps for Greece specifically. As having family there, I'm less concerned about the rest of the Eurozone, and more specifically.
Yeah, but you can't afford to be, because there can never be a Greek solution without a European solution.
So is it to take it to the next step of sort of allowing it to get to a forcing function point, or is there something that can be more readily established in nearer term that could avoid that forcing function point as you move forward in time?
This is a very painful question for me, and I'll tell you why it's painful, because we had an opportunity in 2015 to reboot the loan agreement, and we missed it because we were divided. And now we have signed a new agreement. Well, the government has signed a new agreement. You only have to read the first page to despair. And it is clear. I mean, recently WikiLeaks published a dialogue between two functionaries, Thompson and Valculescu, of the IMF. And they are saying to one another what I'm telling you, that this can't work, it won't work, poor Greeks, they're being squeezed to the ground by the Europeans, and the Europeans are making us, the IMF, squeeze them to the ground, and this is just terrible, and we want to get out of this. This is the IMF speaking, right? So you don't have to take my word for it. So what do we do now? You see, that was the very big question that I was asked after I resigned. People were coming to me, and the supporters, and they were pressurizing me quite a lot to start a new political party. And I just couldn't do it. What would I promise the people? That I would do that which I failed to do the first time round. And anyway, it's too late now. The crisis has spread out beyond Greece. Now we have a massive fight between the German finance minister and the European Central Bank on negative interest rates. I don't know whether you've been following this. My hope, and this is what I'm doing, and this is why I'm applying all my efforts in DiEM, the Democracy in Europe movement. My hope is that what we started in Greece, we can take to the rest of Europe, because unless we reboot European policy at the center, with French participation, German participation, Italians, the Spaniards, the Irish, and so on, then it is impossible to reboot Greece. It sounds quite desperate, I know, but it's a desperate situation, and there's no sense in stopping our pragmatism from dominating.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you for coming. I have a more sort of personal question for you about
Not my shirts.
What? How did you, during this time of probably insane stress and pressure and deadlines and difficulty, sort of manage your process and be productive, given what was going on around you?
It's called adrenaline. It's adrenaline. When, you know, the phone kept ringing constantly, and every phone call was a crisis that I had not predicted. Okay? A funding crisis usually. Something that, because when the system is collapsing, it is chaos. Pure, you know, non-linear mathematics.
Yeah. So how do
it's
you manage?
completely unpredictable what's going to hit you the next second. So it's adrenaline and a sense of responsibility. Look, my therapy was walking everywhere in Athens. So I had no guards or anything like that. I would walk to Parliament, I would walk to the Prime Minister's house or office, residence. I would walk home or go on my motorcycle, but usually I would walk only because of blending with people who would come and disagree with you, say things, but getting their energy. This is seriously, this is what kept me alive. And because of that I could not resign on the 5th of July. I thought, why, to keep the chair? I don't like this chair, take it away from me. I was only happy in it when I felt that it was a prospect for doing something good, for rebooting this situation.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming, first of all. At the beginning of last year, when you started as a finance minister, I had the impression that you were a team with Mr. Tsipras.
That I was?
You were a team together.
Yes, that's the impression I had too.
Yes. So, and when you resigned, and Mr. Tsipras remained there as a prime minister, I had the impression that he gave up on you. And I had the impression that he used you as a bluff against the creditors. So my question to you is, why did he give up on you? Do you have an answer for that?
No, I don't. I don't. And you know what? I have a policy of not projecting my prejudice on somebody else's mind, the other mind problem in philosophy, especially in politics. It's wrong to do it. What I can do is I can tell you what he has said to me, right? Because I think that's legitimate. But trying to project my views about him on him and then telling you what I think he was thinking, I will not do that. I will never do that. It's not productive, I don't think, and I don't trust myself to be able to do it. But look, Alexis allowed the troika, in particular Dijsselbloem, the guy who would come to my office, and Merkel, to drive a wedge between us, slowly at first, and then they kept hammering it in until we were very distant. There was a moment, there were many moments, I won't give you the precise details, but sometime late March, early April, I started feeling that. By the end of April, I was in open confrontation with him. There was a moment when for me, the unsustainable debt and our determination when we were still a team not to accept another euro of debt unless we had stabilized the Greek debt, rendered it sustainable, and rebooted the economic program for Greece, that was our agreement. Yeah? And technically speaking, a very important part of this agreement had to do with the primary surplus. The primary surplus, I remind you, is the difference between the government's tax take and government expenditure, excluding debt repayments. That's the primary surplus. Now, the Troika had imposed on Greece a crazy, insane target of 3.5%, 4.5% of GDP in a broken economy. It's just, any investor who sees this thinks, okay, leave Greece alone. Because for them, with no credit, no investment, and a debt deflationary crisis, they can only try to achieve that primary surplus by increasing taxes year in, year out. So for me, that number was important. It was both substantially important and psychologically important for creating a shock of optimism, to reduce it to 1%, 1.5% at most. And Tsipras and I had agreed on that. At some point, end of April, I'm in his office. I enter his office, discuss various things. I could feel, since the end of March, there were problems between us. The way he was negotiating without me, with Merkel and so on. What Merkel had said to him was, look, ditch Varoufakis, and I'll give you a deal. It's very simple. And the reason why they needed to ditch me was very simple. I had made it abundantly clear, I'm not signing a new bailout loan until and unless I could see that the numbers added up. And, you know, make my day. Just, you know, shoot me. I'm not doing it. And I had credibly committed to this. So they knew that they had to get rid of me. Why? Because all these agreements are signed not by the Prime Minister, but by the Finance Minister. So I was an obstacle. Okay? So they drove this wedge between us. And I remember walking to his office, it was 27th of April or something like that. At that time, there was a barrage of attacks in the press, both international and national, against me. And he went to the restroom, and there was a piece of paper on the coffee table, and so I picked it up and I read it. And I could see that he had given them 3.5% of the primary surplus. And he comes out back and I say, Alexei, do I take it that you gave this without telling me because you knew I would veto it? He said, yeah. So it was big. And at that some point, I said to him, you know, okay, why did you do that? You know that I can't possibly support that. He said, Yanis, you've got to become pragmatic. You have to give something to take something. I said, okay, fine. What did we take? What did we take? He said, they promised that they will give us something on the debt. Something on the debt. What does it mean? A debt restructure. I said, Alexei, you're driving, I used words that I can't use now. We're friends, right? This is complete idiocy. If you accept that you can reach a 3.5% primary surplus, you're accepting that your debt is sustainable because you take this surplus and you give it to the creditors. And then why will they give you a debt restructure if you promise to give them that money? So these are complements. They're not they're not competing. So if you give this, you give that. It's like giving a shark a little bit of blood to convince him to go away. No way. And we had a major clash. So the question is, why did I not resign that night? Well, I wrote my letter of resignation. That was the first one. Second one. I wrote 5. I submitted the 5th. The reason was because, I'll tell you why. Because I felt that even though he was bending over backwards to please the creditors, they would not give him an agreement, whatever he gave them. They wanted to drag our government through the mud as a demonstration effect for the Spaniards, the Irish, the Portuguese. If you dare elect a government like these people, this is what you get. And I felt that when the degree of humiliation for Alexis reached a certain threshold, then he would come back and he would say, come on, let's do it now. It didn't happen.
Thank you.
And I think this is the perfect time to thank our guest today with this intimate story of how it went all. So please give a hand to Mr. Yanis Varoufakis.
Thank you.